Welcome to Spotlight Murder and a story that's haunted investigative journalists and conspiracy theorists for nearly 60 years. Hosted by Kieran Caldwell, a story about truth, power, and the deadly price of asking the wrong questions. Today, we're diving deep into the mysterious death of Dorothy Kilgallen, a woman whose pursuit of the truth may have cost her everything. To most Americans, she was simply the sharp-witted panelist on television's What's My Line? But behind that glamorous facade was one of the most fearless investigative reporters of her generation, a woman whose relentless digging into the JFK assassination put her directly in the crosshairs of some of the most dangerous people in America. What you're about to hear isn't just another conspiracy theory. It's a carefully constructed examination of evidence, connections, and circumstances that paint a chilling picture of what happens when someone gets too close to the truth. So buckle in, because Dorothy Kilgallen's story is about to take you places you never expected to go. Let's start with who Dorothy Kilgallen really was. Sure, America knew her as the glamorous television personality who could make audiences laugh with her quick wit on What's My Line? But that was just one facet of an extraordinary woman who wielded her pen like a sword against corruption and cover-ups. By the early 1960s, Kilgallen had evolved into something rare and dangerous in American journalism, a reporter who wasn't afraid to challenge the most powerful institutions in the country. Through her widely syndicated newspaper column, Voice of Broadway, she had developed a voice that reached millions. But her legacy goes far beyond entertainment gossip or celebrity profiles. When President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas on November 22, 1963, most journalists accepted the official narrative without question. Not Dorothy Kilgallen. While her peers fell in line behind the Warren Commission's findings, she broke ranks and began asking the questions nobody else dared to ask. What made Kilgallen different wasn't just her skepticism, it was her willingness to act on it. She became the first nationally recognized journalist to publicly challenge the government's version of events surrounding JFK's death. And this wasn't armchair quarterbacking. She was on the ground in Dallas, making direct contact with key players, following leads that other reporters wouldn't touch. Through a series of investigative columns that would prove to be prophetic, she exposed accounts from witnesses who claimed they had been intimidated or silenced by law enforcement agencies, specifically the Dallas Police and the FBI. Her reporting was among the first to hint at a broader conspiracy and a possible government cover-up. As her investigation deepened, Kilgallen developed connections with other independent researchers who shared her skepticism of the official story. Most notably, attorney and JFK researcher Mark Lane. She began using her column to bring attention to Lane's findings, which contradicted the Warren Commission's conclusions at every turn. But she also understood the danger she was walking into. Intelligence agencies will be watching us, she warned Lane. We'll have to be very careful. Despite knowing she was likely being surveilled, Kilgallen continued making research trips to New Orleans and Dallas. She told friends again and again, with an intensity that would later seem prophetic. If it's the last thing I do, I'm going to break this case. Those words would prove to be more prescient than anyone could have imagined. Now here's where Kilgallen's investigation takes a turn that absolutely stunned the journalism world. In a move that her peers could hardly believe, she managed to secure something no other reporter had even attempted: a private meeting with Jack Ruby himself. Think about this for a moment. Jack Ruby, the man who silenced Lee Harvey Oswald forever with a single gunshot in a Dallas police station, spoke to only one journalist after that fateful day. And that journalist was Dorothy Kilgallen. With the help of Ruby's attorney, Joe Tonnehill, she convinced the presiding judge, Joe B. Brown, to allow her a one-on-one conversation with Ruby during a recess in court. This meeting took place in March 1964. And the fact that it happened is well documented. Tonnehill confirmed it in a letter to Kilgallen's biographer, Lee Israel. But here's the million-dollar question. What exactly did Ruby tell her? Kilgallen mentioned the interview to a few close friends, but kept the contents to herself. She was planning to reveal everything in a book she was working on, titled Murder One. That book was never completed, and whatever Ruby told her in that room died with her. But Ruby's secrets weren't the only classified material Kilgallen was getting her hands on. In what can only be described as one of the most audacious acts of journalism in American history, she somehow obtained and published excerpts from Jack Ruby's then classified testimony before the Warren Commission. The government's response was swift and aggressive. The FBI launched a full investigation to discover how she had obtained the transcript. When FBI agents confronted her, Kilgallen's response was defiant and uncompromising. An FBI memo from August 1964 records her exact words. She stated that she is the only person who knows the identity of her source, and she will never reveal it. She stated that regardless of the consequences, she will never identify the source to anyone. That statement was serious enough to be relayed directly to the Warren Commission by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover himself. Think about that. The head of the FBI was personally briefing the Warren Commission about one journalist's refusal to reveal her sources. That's how seriously the government took Dorothy Kilgallen's reporting. Here was a woman who had not only penetrated the wall of secrecy surrounding the JFK assassination, but was actively publishing material the government desperately wanted to keep hidden. She wasn't just asking questions, she was getting answers, and those answers were threatening some very powerful people. Now let's talk about the connections that make Dorothy Kilgallen's death so much more than just a tragic overdose. Because when you start mapping out the relationships between the key players in this story, a web emerges that's so intricate and dangerous, it reads like something out of a crime novel. Let's start with Melvin Belly, the flamboyant attorney who represented Jack Ruby. Belly wasn't just any lawyer. He was deeply connected to the criminal underworld through his work as Mickey Cohen's attorney. Cohen was a major West Coast mob figure, and Belly's representation of both Cohen and Ruby creates a direct link between Ruby and organized crime. During Ruby's trial, something interesting happened. Dorothy Kilgallen befriended Melvin Belly. Whether this friendship was genuine or strategic on either side, it gave her unprecedented access to Ruby's defense team and, ultimately, to Ruby himself. But here's where the connections get really interesting. Kilgallen wasn't just a journalist investigating the mob. She was personally friends with Frank Costello, one of the most powerful organized crime figures in America. Costello wasn't just any mobster. He was a mentor and associate of Carlos Marcello, the New Orleans mob boss who many believe was directly involved in the JFK assassination. Now picture this scenario. Kilgallen is digging deep into connections between the mob and the JFK assassination. She's making trips to New Orleans, Marcello's territory, and getting dangerously close to exposing the truth. If Marcello felt threatened by her investigation, wouldn't it make sense that he might reach out to his associate Frank Costello and suggest that their mutual friend had become a liability? The trips to New Orleans are particularly telling. In the weeks before her death, Kilgallen made several suspicious trips to the city, accompanied by her friend Mark Sinclair. She told Sinclair that she feared they were being followed. What was she doing there? Who was she meeting with? And why was she so convinced they were under surveillance? According to those close to the investigation, Kilgallen was on the trail of linking Marcello to both Ruby and Oswald, a connection that, if proven, could have blown the JFK assassination case wide open and exposed organized crime's role in the murder of a president. But the web extends even further. Frank Sinatra, who had his own reasons to dislike Kilgallen, was connected to this same network. Kilgallen had publicly criticized Sinatra's mafia affiliations and his private life in her column. Sinatra was friends with both Costello and other figures in this criminal network. All of these men, Costello, Marcello, Cohen, Belly, Sinatra, shared powerful networks and, perhaps more importantly, a shared interest in keeping Dorothy Kilgallen silent. In the days leading up to her death, Dorothy Kilgallen's behavior became increasingly urgent and paranoid. Multiple witnesses, including her hairdresser, makeup artist, and close friends, reported the same chilling message. She believed she was in danger, but she was also convinced she was on the verge of a major breakthrough. "I'm going to break this case wide open," she told several people in those final days. But along with that excitement came fear. She spoke of feeling watched, followed, threatened. These weren't the ramblings of a paranoid woman. They were the concerns of a seasoned investigative reporter who understood the stakes of what she was uncovering. The timing is crucial here. Kilgallen had spent months, perhaps years, building a massive file of confidential information and first-hand interviews. She had sources from Dallas to New Orleans, from the FBI to the mob. She had interviewed Jack Ruby privately, obtained classified Warren Commission testimony, and developed a network of contacts that spanned the entire conspiracy. As her friend Marlon Swing once said, Dorothy was a very powerful woman. People don't have any idea of the contacts and power she had. Dorothy had favors she could call in from people all over the world. That kind of influence, paired with the sensitive material she had collected, made her a ticking time bomb for those who had something to hide. But perhaps the most chilling evidence of what was coming comes from Melvin Belly himself. After Kilgallen's death, Belly reportedly made two statements that, in hindsight, seem almost prophetic. First, he said, "They've killed Dorothy. Now they'll go after Ruby." Later, he made an even more disturbing remark, suggesting that Ruby had perhaps been injected with cancer cells. If Belly knew, or suspected, there was a coordinated effort to silence those who knew too much about the JFK assassination, his comments point to a conspiracy that extended far beyond a single death. Ruby did indeed die of cancer while in prison, and his death was as convenient for the conspirators as Kilgallen's would prove to be. On the morning of November 8, 1965, Dorothy Kilgallen was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse. The official cause of death was acute intoxication from a combination of barbiturates and alcohol. But like everything else in Dorothy Kilgallen's story, the details of her death raise more questions than they answer. The toxicology report revealed something puzzling. Neither the alcohol nor the barbiturates in her system were present in quantities that would typically be considered lethal on their own. Instead, it was the precise combination of the two that resulted in a fatal depression of her central nervous system, causing her heart to stop. Here's what makes this so suspicious. Researcher Cassie Parnow points out that the estimated amount of drugs in Kilgallen's system was almost eerily exact. Roughly 5 pills each of 3 different barbiturates, just enough to be lethal when combined with alcohol, but far from the massive overdose typical in suicide cases. Compare this to her husband Richard's eventual suicide, where he reportedly consumed every pill he could find. That's what a suicidal overdose looks like. Desperate, excessive, overwhelming. Dorothy's dosage fell into a much narrower and more suspicious category. Too many pills to be accidental, yet too few to represent clear suicidal intent. Medical experts who have reviewed her case note that the dosage didn't match the profile of either an accidental overdose or a typical suicide. In most suicides involving pills, people consume massive quantities, often in a desperate and furious act. Kilgallen had access to many more pills. Her household reportedly had vast supplies of barbiturates, but she took only a moderate amount that would not have caused death without the alcohol. The timing makes it even more suspicious. Witnesses reported that she was alert and in control as late as 1 a.m., though slightly under the influence. Her death was estimated around 2 a.m. Given the typical effects of barbiturates, accidentally consuming 15 to 20 pills in such a short window while still functioning would be virtually impossible. Dr. James L. Luke, the Manhattan assistant medical examiner who performed the autopsy, found no signs of external injury or indications that Kilgallen had been subjected to violence. There were no wounds, bruises, or marks suggesting a struggle, but he also couldn't definitively determine whether the overdose was accidental or intentional, leading to an official verdict of undetermined. In his interview with the New York Times, Dr. Luke said, "We really don't know. All we know is that depressants such as alcohol and barbiturates, one on top of another, are dangerous. But was this really just a tragic accident, or was there something much more sinister at play?" One theory that demands serious consideration is whether Dorothy Kilgallen's own husband, Richard Colmar, might have been responsible for her death. While this might seem far-fetched, the evidence supporting this possibility is more substantial than many realize. Kerry Colmar, Richard's son, provided a crucial piece of information to author Lee Israel. He described his father as having vats of pills around, containers of tunol large enough to pickle mice. This vivid description indicates that Richard had abundant access to tunol, one of the barbiturates found in Dorothy's bloodstream after her death. This access gave Richard both the means and opportunity to potentially spike Dorothy's drink or cause her to ingest more pills than her system could safely handle. Given that Dorothy didn't have her own prescription for tunol, the logical conclusion is that she obtained the drug from Richard. But access alone doesn't establish motive. However, there's evidence that Richard might have had both emotional and financial reasons to want Dorothy out of the picture. Sources suggest he may have been overwhelmed by jealousy regarding Dorothy's lifestyle and career success, or angered by her threat to amend her will, a move that could potentially diminish his inheritance. There's also a disturbing precedent. In March 1965, when Kilgallen was hospitalized with a fractured left shoulder, Pearl Bauer, who served as assistant to Kilgallen's secretary, recalled that Richard brought Kilgallen pills and liquor that damn near killed her. If Richard had nearly killed his wife once through a combination of pills and alcohol, could he have succeeded the second time? Consider this scenario. Richard, possibly impaired by alcohol himself and knowing Dorothy's habits, could have added tunol to her drink during the early morning hours. This could have been done while Dorothy was distracted or momentarily absent from the room. If Dorothy then took additional pills on her own, unaware of what was already in her system, the combination could have been fatal. Another possibility is that Richard accidentally administered a lethal dose when Dorothy requested sleeping medication. Upon discovering Dorothy unconscious or unresponsive, Richard, possibly panicked and fearing criminal charges, might have staged the scene to conceal his involvement. Whether Richard had assistance from household staff members like the butler James Clement or the maid Marie Eichler remains unknown, but the presence of large quantities of barbiturates in Dorothy's system, combined with Richard's access to these drugs and the precedent of his previous near miss with the same combination, makes his involvement, whether intentional or accidental, a serious possibility. If Richard intentionally spiked Dorothy's drink with barbiturates, this would constitute premeditated murder. If his actions were unintentional, he could still be legally responsible for manslaughter. Either way, the husband theory deserves serious consideration in any honest examination of Dorothy Kilgallen's death. Let's talk about coincidences, because Dorothy Kilgallen's story is full of them. So many, in fact, that they strain credibility to the breaking point. Skeptics might argue that it was merely coincidental that Mickey Cohen's lawyer, Melvin Belly, ended up representing Jack Ruby, that Kilgallen just happened to befriend Belly during Ruby's trial, that she just happened to be the only journalist in the country granted a private interview with Ruby, that she just happened to obtain and leak Ruby's classified Warren Commission testimony. They might say it was just a coincidence that she happened to be the only mainstream journalist still digging relentlessly into the JFK assassination when others backed off, that she happened to accumulate a massive file of confidential information and first-hand interviews, that she happened to make those suspicious trips to New Orleans in the weeks before her death. They'd claim it was pure coincidence that, days before her death, she told multiple friends she was in danger, but close to breaking the case wide open, that she just happened to die mysteriously before she could publish any of her findings, and that her entire investigative file, years of work, exclusive interviews, classified documents, just happened to disappear forever after her death. But here's the thing about coincidences. When there are too many of them, they stop being coincidences and start being patterns. And the pattern in Dorothy Kilgallen's case points to something much more sinister than bad luck or tragic accident. The web of connections we discussed earlier isn't just a series of random relationships. It's a carefully constructed network of power, influence, and mutual interest. When you have organized crime figures, government officials, and entertainment industry power brokers all connected through various relationships, and when one person threatens to expose the connections between all of them, that person becomes a target. Dorothy Kilgallen wasn't just investigating the JFK assassination in abstract terms. She was following a trail that led directly to some of the most dangerous people in America. She was threatening to expose not just what happened in Dallas, but who ordered it, who carried it out, and who covered it up afterward. Her death didn't just remove a troublesome journalist from the equation. It eliminated a serious threat to the entire network of people involved in the conspiracy. Whether that threat came from the mob, from government agencies, or from closer to home, the result was the same: silence. Perhaps the most damning evidence that Dorothy Kilgallen was murdered isn't in what we know, but in what disappeared after her death. Remember that massive file of investigative materials she had compiled? The exclusive interviews, the classified documents, the connections she had mapped out between organized crime and the JFK assassination? All of it vanished. This wasn't just a few missing papers or a misfiled folder. This was years of meticulous investigative work, the kind of comprehensive documentation that could have blown the JFK case wide open. And it disappeared so completely that not a single page has ever surfaced, despite the efforts of researchers, biographers, and conspiracy theorists who have spent decades looking for it. How does that much evidence simply vanish? The most logical explanation is that someone with access to Kilgallen's home removed it before authorities arrived, or that someone with authority ordered its removal and destruction. Either scenario points to a level of organization and premeditation that goes far beyond a simple overdose or domestic dispute. The timing of the evidence's disappearance is crucial. If Dorothy Kilgallen had died of natural causes or in a genuine accident, her investigative files would have remained for her family, her colleagues, or researchers to discover. The fact that they vanished suggests that someone knew exactly what to look for and exactly why it needed to disappear. This wasn't random theft or coincidental loss. This was the systematic elimination of evidence that could have changed American history. And it was carried out with precision and thoroughness that suggests professional involvement. She chased a truth so dangerous it may have cost her life. Dorothy Kilgallen dug into a web of power, corruption, and silence, and died with the answers she vowed to find still out of reach. Whether her death was murder, a cover-up, or a tragic accident, it came at the most convenient moment for those with something to hide. Her courage shows that journalism can be a grave risk, and the threads she pulled at still tremble beneath the official story. Think you know the facts? Missing files, cut interviews, and unsettling connections suggest the story is far from finished. Want the full, uncut investigation, documents, recordings, and the leads they tried to bury? Download the Skoob app now to get access to the full story. Listen to the complete episode and decide for yourself.